something, but I addressed this problem in the conclusion or in one chapter of my my book, which is African Film Studies and Introduction. Here, if it can come up, yes, where I
Wow.
yes where I I was saying that it's we have to know when I say, well, I'm talking with the Africans, that we have to leverage the increased interest in Africa. Otherwise, we will end up with another scramble for Africa, but this time for the African creative talent and stories. And once it's dried, okay, the studios will be gone. Because so far, if you see the intervention of those studios in Africa, as of now, it's in the form of co-productions or content acquisitions. But so far, they haven't invested in setting up infrastructure that will lead to long-term, local, sustainable film industries and media industries. I know Netflix a year ago has launched a $1 million scholarship to train African film and media students on the continent, but that alone is kind of a drop in the bucket. So if we don't leverage it, it will be just another scramble for Africa, and this time just for the creative talent and stories, and we'll just let be dry. So.
Oh, but despite all the situations, there are lots more of people or school of thought saying that most of these big studios are funded or indirectly funded by so many investors, and almost all of the studios are under publicly owned companies. And yet in Africa, not any big billionaires are coming into this industry, to be specific, the media industry at large. And in the absence of these big studios, where do you think we are headed?
I think that's we have to be very, very creative in that sense because, yeah, we talk about the big studios who've been around for more than 100 years. So right at the start of cinema, and for us, I'm going back, circling back to what is the best economic model for the continent, and in the absence of big studios, or we don't necessarily have to go down that path. We have to find ways to develop our own, cinema. In that sense, I know at one point the African Union wanted to get really involved in cinema. I don't know what's that project. At what point, if that project stopped or still going. The larger point here when I'm invoking the African Union is maybe have continental, initiatives that can, promote cinema for a local level so that we can pick it up. Because cinema, let's be honest, it costs a lot of money. It's got a lot of money and it requires a lot of funding. So in terms of fundraising, we can talk about crowdfunding, but for a very good film, you're talking about millions of dollars. So maybe in another avenue that I see that is kind of untapped, it is to convince our banks that you can make money in the film industry. So to make money, you don't need to go the usual route of the real estate or investing in agriculture or other industries. I'm not saying they're not important, but you can make equal into money in the media and film industries as well. The banks, we have to convince the banks, and also we have to convince business people that there is a lot of money to be made in cinema. Because so far, I think in terms of wealth creation, they only see other avenues, but not cinema. But we all know that cinema is art and business.
Hmm. That is right, because in the Nollywood, Jade Osiberu have tried to involve GT Bank in the process of her journey as a film producer and director. And at some point, it works because GT Bank have disbursed some amount of money for her, and it helps to her to position herself. Though she's originally from the industry, the finance industry, and that have fine-tuned her way in making sure that she get the resources. Because getting money from banks in Africa is so complicated. Do you think there are other ways that these filmmakers could be able to navigate their source of funding?
Yes, I would say, true. Yes, very true too, because you have so many prerequisites for that the banks required. That sometimes it's very difficult for ordinary people, or let's say filmmakers, to come up with the guarantees that the bank required. So for me, it's in addition to banks, I'm going to expand the institutional breadth here. You have pension funds. Pension funds. I also see a lot of lotteries, national lottery organization that is being called to fund, and also insurance companies that are being also called to fund. That's kind of still on the wider spectrum of financial institution. The other I would say solution that I see, and that I'm drawing from the experience of Black cinema in the US, African American cinema in the US, which for me in terms of positionality is like African cinema, in the world, because you have African American cinema in the US, which we can classify as independent cinema compared to Hollywood, studio cinema. And what one movement that we see for a number of years now is the creation of collectives where filmmakers, producers get together. It could be based on affinity of being in a given geographical areas, or working on a given thematic theme, treatment, or on a given genre. So the creation of collectives for me is pulling together the resources to be able to leverage that size and that influence to be able to access more credit. That's the one way that I see a lesson that we can draw from African American cinema here. I'm talking about independent cinema.
Oh, wow. And in some angle, in some way, there are lots more of asset managers, fund managers who are saying, hey, there are a lot of ways, there are a lot of things that we could be do in the film and TV business. There are lots of them coming, like UBA have tried to start a kind of streamer TV, Red TV, and it's working. It is working, and they have funded some talk shows and series and lots more of that. But other people in the finance sector are not finding the industry adaptable. Like in Kenya, most of their movies that are funded by communities, local communities, and there are lots more of the tech communities growing on in Kenya. I said, oh, hey, if you want to get access to government, fund some resources into movie making, and before you know, the government will trust you. Then how do you think the filmmakers could build trust to get access to all this basket of resources, be it from the banks, be it from the business community, be it from community, or because to be frank, we here in Africa and maybe talking about Nigeria, we are yet to see filmmakers creating collectives, but rather tapping into their friendship. Maybe you could see Ant Hills partnering with Grill just for to get access to some community or some settings or some crew. Maybe partner with Ant Hills to produce animations or other things. Then how do you think these filmmakers across Africa, and to be specific, Africa, Nigeria, Egypt, Kenya, South Africa, and Burkina and Senegal, to get access to these resources by building what they could do to build the trust? Because all these people, when you come to them, they say, hey, we don't trust the value chain of this business, because it is very hard for your money to get back. It may take years, it may take, and they are not sure. Then how can they build trust?
I think, yeah, the trust. I think at one point, we have to move beyond the siloed approach to the industry, where you have the producers struggling on one corner with the issues, and then the filmmakers, and then the financier. Maybe at one point, we need to bring everybody, all the stakeholders, from the producers to the distributors to the financiers, in one room around one table, so that we can all put our energies, our intelligence together, and figure out what is the best way that we can move forward. And I think that hasn't happened yet. When I say happened yet, at least to the point where we move beyond our differences, which okay, are not bad, but to the point that, okay, we need to move beyond it. Because at the beginning of the conversation, we mentioned the difference, like North African, film model, economic film model, the South African one that is more connected to Hollywood, or even different models. Could we maybe like one stop shop model, where we come together in, let's say, in the form of the film labs that have been, springing out across the continent, where can we have like one African cinema day on the continent, where we'll bring everybody in and have 1 day or 2 day, everybody's there, and we have to figure out what is the best economic model, what, how the banks, the financier, what are the products that they can roll out for filmmakers, and how filmmakers with limited means can provide guarantees.
Hmm. That's right, because we need to provide platforms, and that brings me to another side of the value chain, film festivals. Burkina Faso have organized the biggest film festival in Africa for years, FESPACO. And FESPACO is not tapped by many of these African communities, filmmaking communities. Rather, the Western people are using that avenue as a way to collect African movies that are best, and they can that can help facilitate their agendas in Africa. What are you seeing? African filmmakers using platforms, festivals like FESPACO the correct way? And maybe you should tell us, being more focused with most of the francophone countries, what can you say about FESPACO and how African makers should use FESPACO?
I think FESPACO is has, like you said, is I would say the prime, African Film Festival on the continent, and it has, I would say, legitimacy, has history, has a standing. It's a festival that can and should be leveraged for filmmakers to have, I would say, to have more an entry point beyond the continent. And also, I would say, also on the continent, because it raised the question of the film distribution beyond the festival, because beyond the time of the festival. The point I'm making is the festival provide this avenue over 10 days, but could we find ways where the festival is, okay, we have an itinerant version of a festival. The festival closes, then we'll have a mini FESPACO that will go to different countries, different communities over 1 year, to allow local communities to see movies that you and I, are fortunate enough when we go to festival to see them. So for me, it's how the festival can allow communities in remote areas to have access to their own stories. And then, okay, if we decide that, okay, we want to export those films beyond the continent, that's also very good possibilities, because you already have other festivals on the continent, outside the continent, that come to FESPACO and or the Durban, the film festival, or even other film festival on the continent. I would say to select movies for our own festivals. But for me, is to summarize, for me is FESPACO really is that window, but also can we leverage it to have more of our community members. When I say community members, I'm talking about those who live in rural, remote areas. And the story sometimes is about us, it's about them, but they rarely got the opportunity to see it for infrastructure, challenges before, because of lack of electricity, lack of simple projectors. So could we bring the stories to them from the festivals?
And maybe we should be using the festivals to trigger conversations, just like Durban Film Festival is now ongoing, and is just a kind of conglomerate of to celebrate movies than to use it as a window to start conversations. Why Africans are not using festivals circuit to trigger conversations? Or like when you go to Sundance, when you go to most of these Oscars, and you can see it's a platform to trigger conversations. Why we are not using our festival circuit to trigger conversations that matter to us?
I think good question, because you mentioned because while you're mentioning Sundance, I'm thinking about there is a festival here. When I say here, I am in New York and in Harlem. But it's a festival called Congo in Harlem, where it brings movies and artists just around Congo to talk about Congo, DRC Congo. So I think to your question, I will say we have to rethink the curatorial practices on the continent, where festival has primarily been about the exhibition of movies and followed by Q&A with directors. And more and more we have workshops on the sides, professional workshops on the side. But to engage in larger conversation, it hasn't happened very often as it should be. At FESPACO, you have Codestria, the Council for the Development of Social Science Research in Africa. It's that is based in Dakar, Senegal. It's a Pan-African organization. And for many editions of FESPACO, we have tried to bring the conversation, we've tried to create a space where filmmakers, practitioners, and theorists and thinkers will come and discuss questions around cinema, about representation, about history. And those kind of platforms need to happen. And for that to happen, it is for us to rethink our curatorial practices on the continent. What's the festival about? Is it just a screening of movies and bring filmmakers to take questions, and have, I would say, professional workshop on the side, or is it more than that? I think it should be more than that. That's why it's upon us to rethink what is a festival in the 21st century. Now that we have streaming platforms, which means that you have many avenues to see the movies. So if you come to the festival, let's have something more than just exhibition.
More than just exhibition. And what are things that you think that are more than just exhibitions? I know there are a lot of conversations, but how do you think we should start doing that? I know there are a lot of grants, avenues for outcomes, master classes, and lots more of awards and a marketplace of themes. what are the how do you think they should do it? Because sometimes they used to say, hey, there are no more sponsors funding to do all this or to around the continent is to tell the filmmakers community and larger community or society at large, hey, there is this film festival going on in Morocco, and we need to be there, and we need to trigger conversations and lots more of things, be it a marketplace of films and marketplace of film ideas and scripts. Do you think what how they should do that to make sure that they take the film festival circuit more than just an exhibition platforms and marketplace of films?
For me, I would give it two examples. The first one, which you mentioned, the challenge of having funds enough to have events, and like you and I we are doing. Okay, you are in Kano, I am in New York. We can leverage technology to make that happen. But I would I would say two ways to make it happen is we have one way is which is kind of circling back to our conversation for me is to create a platform where we have the practitioners and public policy makers to come together, because on so far we have the practitioners and all the industry stakeholders struggling to make things happen. But if we are able to get the policymakers from government, from the NGOs to come together at festivals, that will help the conversation going and help us have more solutions for the challenges, but also for the opportunities that is ahead of us. That's on one side. The other side that I see that we haven't tapped into it yet is exhibits. When I say exhibits, exhibits, video installations, that side we haven't developed it as part of festivals yet. So we still tend to think about film exhibits or video installation in the context of museum. But we can have film festival also take on that role, or add that component where we go, uh, we watch movies, but also we educate ourselves, and also we push what's our curatorial practices further to the boundaries, and that's something should happen.
Mm.
Because if as of now I don't pretend to know everything, and I don't know everything about our African cinema, but I would love to to see exhibits on African cinema.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And there are lots more of things happening right now. Maybe you should tell us a little more about your animation festival and why.
yeah, my animation festival is Harlem African Animation Festivals. It's scheduled for later this year. It will be in November. The exact dates I will send it out later, because later the festival. The festival film is the first African animation, festival in the US, and the idea is to give a platform, a voice, and a presence to animators on the continent, because already animation on the continent is one that doesn't get a lot of attention, even go to the festivals on the continent, rarely in terms of prize. They don't get the most coveted prize, and yet, if we will look at the history of cinema on the continent, we'll realize that some of the first post-colonial African film to be made, some of them were animated films. So that's why I wanted to give this platform to animation. And also the other reality is the growing sectors of the big tent of what is African cinema and media Right now, you talk it's animation, it's gaming, and local TV series. Those are the three that are really the growing sectors right now. So we need to give them the support that we can.
And you do believe like African filmmakers and storytellers are using animation as an avenue to tell the story of Africa?
So far, in terms of thematic treatment or in terms of aesthetics, how the story is told, we see that animation is has been, I would say, drawing a lot from African oral storytelling, be it in the forms of folk tales, in terms of short stories. It's drawing a lot from that. And another way, also, we can see how animation is contributing to preserve the loss or erasure of the oral storytelling on the continent. So, in that sense, it's something that works both ways. Is bringing African story and oral storytelling to the wider audience, but also contributing to preserve it.
Oh, you are right. You are right. But let's go back to the area of storytelling. And I know you are expert in that when it comes to Africa, Black, and their culture. Do you think African filmmakers and storytellers are doing enough to tell the original African stories?
When it's mentioned original, I don't know what is the original African stories, because uh, I would say, for me, the question is, they're doing enough with what they got in terms of means. So, which brings into question the talent. I think they're talented, and we're fighting with the means that they have in the context, in the present context, that is sometimes very difficult with limited financial means. In that sense, I will say yes. Does it means that in terms of potential we have reached the potential? Absolutely not, because you have a huge potential in terms of stories to be told. It's simply, okay, you need financial means to make it happen. And because that was last year. You have the Woman King, the story based on the Agodje from Benin, from Dahomey. That's a story that this kind of stories, you have many types of these stories on the continent. And if we can get enough funding to make these kind of large budget, big budget movies, that will even uh, put African cinema on the map.
And there is this saying like South Africans are now leading in telling original African stories because they are behind the Woman King, and also they are behind Shaka LMB and lots more of stories that are original, and they are telling authentic African stories. Though our culture metamorphose and there are lots of cultures that are now part of us.
Mm.
And how are you seeing stories like Woman King coming outside of Africa and the impact in telling, shaping the reputation and image of Africa?
Yes, I think that you're going to get me into travel here. Yes, you have, yeah, I know the movie came with controversy, a lot of debates around why the Woman King was made by an African American woman, while the story is African. Why African filmmakers don't get to make this kind of movies of this story? Uh, which which on one end I can see both sides of the arguments. But for me, is the first it was made, so the story it brings it was made, and it brings it brings to the fore the conversation of what are the stories that we can make, because I'm dancing around it because it's controversial, because here, because the question is, who has the authority to tell whose story? I think that's the larger question. Who has the authority to tell whose story? And Iran Woman King is, okay, this is a black woman, an African American woman who made the movie. Uh, okay, so why not an African? Okay, why not an African? I think
Mm.
that's a very, it's very difficult, because if we think in terms of Pan-Africanism, we can say, okay, we're all black people, and it's true, we have our differences, historical and cultural differences, but first, we are all black people, and if the movie has been made and led this black story, African story, to be known, globally, that's a good step. But I understand also the other side of the argument that Africans, should be given more uh, platform and more means to be able to tell their stories. That also is a valid point.
Uh, Uh, yes, and that is this discussion going around like misrepresentation of culture in this the movie Woman King, and likewise maybe there is this movie locally made here in Nigeria, The Gangs of Lagos,
Mhm.
and that has been go to the extent of going to court that there is this misrepresentation of culture, and there are a lot of movies from the Burkinabe film industry that are having lots more conflict with the local censorship boards. And if you go to Egypt, likewise, there are lots more movies coming out of this Egyptian filmmaking industry, which they are all debating misrepresentation of culture. And as a storyteller and insider from different angle, from the scholar side, from the practitioner side, uh, what can you say about this evolving and debates about making sure like we present the culture this way, or we should just tell the story across the continent, be it North Africa or Central Africa or West or South?
Like I said, this one is tricky, because I'm coming back, because the central point is, who has the right to tell whose story, and that is it's a difficult question to answer, because I understand, stories. If you are stories are told from the inside, it brings a complete different perspective than the one that is told from the outside, and rightful so. Uh, we should have agency. When I say agency, we should have the power, the means to tell our stories in a way that it does justice to our stories, not in a way that bears the mark of a given agenda, or simply telling a story just to make uh, quick buck, but without thinking about the implication of how a given community is misrepresented. Because to your question, I will give example drawn from black cinema here in the U.S. In the 70s. You have one vein called black exploitation. Black exploitation. It's a series of films that were made by African Americans for African American communities, and that mostly features black actors, black cast. And the movies were basically, I would say, perpetuating stereotypes about black people in the US here, as stereotypes of prostitutes, of pimps, of of violence, and there was an outcry from the community that this type of movies misrepresent the community, hence the names of black exploitation. So, I'm giving this example to say that yes, there can be misrepresentation if people from within don't have the agency to tell the stories from their own perspective, because we know cinema, we know the camera, that whoever is behind the camera, and I'm talking about the director, what is projected or what is seen on the screen, sometimes bears their own idea, their own biases, whether conscious or unconscious, about the object or the reality that is being filmed. I'm just saying that the camera, we like to think it as objective, but you have a lot of subjectivity coming into the camera from who is behind the camera. So in that sense, if who is behind the camera is from a given community, maybe they might well tell the story.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe from what you have just said, I see a lot of younger Africans trying to say, "Hey, this is enough. We need to just do it our own ways." And locally here, you can see here in Nollywood, you can see Ant Hills producing now. Is already going to be on our screen in August, but the trailer is out. The movie Jagun Jagun. I don't know if you have saw the trailer of Jagun Jagun from the Ant Hills.
No, I have not yet seen it yet.
Okay, okay. And likewise, we have Anakulafo
Mm-hmm.
from the works of Kule Afolayan.
I follow. Yeah, yeah, yes. Yes. And yeah, we earlier mentioned animation and the part of the bird scene. Okay, it's one that is being come from animators. So which that part has yet to be explore deeper. I'm talking about here the intersection of live action cinema and animation, because so far, every I won't say everyone is on its side, on its own corner, but we can have an enriched cinema experience, and in terms of creativity also, if we can, bring those two. Uh, in our creation. I'm talking about incorporating animated scenes into live action cinema. And I will say that Nollywood, there is no better example than Nollywood. And because at least from the early Nollywood, we see how visual effect is very foundational to the practice. So animation should normally come handy when it comes to live action, cinema.
Yes, and as a scholar who have his demography and theory is mostly Africa. Take us through all these industries in Africa, because there is this saying that is no outside of Nollywood and South African cinema, and maybe the likes of Burkina Faso and the upcoming Kenyans and Egypt, maybe and probably Tunisia nowadays. People are saying there is not any film cinema in the other almost 40 almost 49 countries.
Yeah, there is.
Is
Yeah,
this countries not producing movies, films, TV series?
I think they are. Is simply that in terms of distribution, it's difficult because to get those movies to the general public beyond festival. I'll take the case of Somalia. Somalia, okay, has for at least for the last two edition of FESPACO, they won some of the best prizes at FESPACO. And at last edition of Espaco, that was March. I was, in the movie theater with the director, who's, the producer, whose, short film was awarded the best prize for a short film, and that is, and the title is "Will My Parents Come to See Me?" And it's a story about a terrorist who was to be executed, a young terrorist. And in a short film, you see it visually. It's so gripping, the story, and you are like, and I think the movie is made in Puntland or some. Look, it's part of the larger Somalia. So I'm just saying that, okay, but those movies you can only see it in festival because of in terms of distribution channels. We don't the intra Africa film distribution channels is not to the par where we can all see films from different different parts of the continent. So you have countries like, I would take another country that's maybe that doesn't come up on the radar, but also does good movies. Madagascar for some years, I would say 2000 2010 was I would say the capital of animation on the continent, but we rarely could see it. And I could take the case of Portuguese speaking Africa. They have a very good and I would say very good and long-standing documentary tradition on the continent. And I would say for documentary filmmaking, there is no other part of the continent that beats them, which has been developed from the struggle for political independence. We know that be it colonies from France, from England, or Belgium, they gained the independence relatively early, but the Portuguese-speaking colonies, they have to wait till the late 70s and early. So, and that struggle has been documented using the documentary medium. So that documentary has a very, very, I would say, unestablished long tradition there. And also in terms of thematic treatment, I will take the example of Angola. You will see across many of Angolan films. Don't mean to generalize it, but some of the Angolan film that I've watched, I've seen that the thread between them is talking about the trauma of the struggle for independence, and then once they get the independence, the civil war that ravaged the country. And then okay, you have other countries like North Africa, Tunisia, Morocco, that has a different film industry where you have the government that is perform two roles. The government is at the same time a funder and regulator.
Yes, yes. But there are other gens, like you talk about documentaries. Are African filmmakers doing a lot more to pick up the documentary genre as part of means of telling stories? Because we don't see local filmmakers producing documentary. Most of the time are the big four media houses and other key big directors coming to Africa to do filmmaking. Even National Geography is not coming to Africa.
Mm-hmm. So your question is, it's documentaries only made by the big companies and studios from outside?
Yes, in that sense, then why Africans are not doing enough? And from your perspective, are they doing enough or they are not?
In terms of documentary, I think in terms of documentary, yes, I think they're doing a lot, a lot. But because documentary has been regarded, some would say as kind of a springboard for young filmmakers to go into, let's say, fiction, to do feature, feature length movies. So in that sense, documentary, yes, documentary has a I've seen many times, like Last Vespaco, a few months ago. I've seen a very good documentary. I'll give example. It's from Guinea, Guinea Conakry, and the title is Le Cimetière de la Pellicule, which is the celluloid cemetery, word for word, and it's tracking the first film, the first African film to be made, post-colonial film to be made, and and that is just the excuse to take the viewer through the film history of Guinea, of a country, from from the past until today, like the discussion we've been having to so far. What is the film, what is the history of cinema in Guinea? What is the distribution channels? What are the funding challenges? And today, young people going into filmmaking, what are the challenges? So documentary you still see on the continent, that is something that has a long future. Yes.
And then the TV reality shows going around. Like yesterday, it was a mecca for a lot more of BB Niger followers.
Yeah.
How are you seeing reality shows in Africa?
Yeah. For me, I've said, look, for me, at one point, reality show was, could be a hard thing, uh, but I see it as more. Sorry to say it, but I see it as losing momentum for me compared to local TV series. Local TV series, I see it more like being on the rise now, and or even a web series. And for me, it's kind of an extension of simply neighborhood gossip, and also that's what many people also relate to those stories. And I think also being the question of high art and low art, but I think to this point, it's not even that much of a discussion, because I think what the public, the general audience has interest in, I think that's what they should be given the opportunity to watch and relate to those stories. That's why for many years, telenovelas from different part of the continent has been very popular on the continent, and I'm happy that to see that on the continent now we have our version of long form drama in TV series and web series that bring us entertainment, and also we can relate to the cast that are being seen on the screens.
And you said so much about Nollywood as one of the leading industry in Africa, and you said so much about TV series, but you don't talk about comedy. Are we doing enough in when it comes to comedy? Because the comedy industry is dominated by like
Mhm.
content creators and content creators on YouTube. I mean, sketch makers.
Yes, definitely. Because sorry, I don't need to unplug it, but when you say comedy, because I wrote a book about this
Wow.
comedy TV series and transformation that came out a few years ago. Yes, it's something that
Wow.
I've written about, and also I've
Wow.
produced a web series on African immigrant experience in New York for 2 years, and it's I posted online on YouTube, and it's built around comedy. And I think comedy is also one of these a genre that has a lot of potential, and but within the film industry, doesn't get the attention or at least the recognition that it deserves. But in terms of comedy, on maybe let's say kids, it's growing in popularity, and you see it in humor across all over the continent in different languages, and this needs to be taken into account. And for me, it really pushes the envelope. It pushes the boundaries of what is what is cinema, because so far our definition of cinema has been very, I would say, straight-jacketed, but we'll have at one point to push the boundaries of what is cinema, because maybe I'm going to make a tangent, but related to your question, which is here in the US, you have Hollywood studio cinema. I want to say that is in crisis, or in existential crisis, or identity crisis, I should say, identity crisis, vis-a-vis the Netflix streaming economic model. So saying that, okay, cinema is in flux, so we should also, bring into the fold forms or practices that we see that being maybe on the fringe, for skits, YouTube series or web series built around humor. Because the reality is, if you take those humor and on those comedic practices, they usually are prolongations of local tradition in terms of storytelling, in terms of theatrical traditions. So we draw a lot from our own culture to bring those skits to the screen.
Yeah. And before we go further, we are calling the attention of most of our viewers and followers. If you have question for Professor, just drop down in our comment section, or if you could forward it down to our DMs, that would do lots more, and could present those questions to Professor. Professor, you have said you're talking lately about the streamers, and streamers are already in the game of slashing subscriber fee in Africa. What are you seeing these streamers heading in making sure that they provide lots more of affordable prices for Africans to subscribe to their services, and making sure that they consume global content?
Okay, are you referring to the big studio like Disney, that Netflix, or are you referring to local content producers on the continent?
I'm referring to the big studios, because there are the ones who are competing now in Africa, making sure that game of getting subscribers. Yes. Because most of our, as previously in our conversation, most of these movies nowadays we are producing from Africa and majorly distributed through all these big studios and big streamers.
Yeah, but Disney Plus, Disney Plus, we have Netflix, or even so, like like I said earlier in our conversation, we have Africa is for me is the next frontier in terms of market. So rightfully there will be more interest and also more streaming coming to the continent to get to expand the market. That we should expect it, but simply, like I said, we should not allow this to happen, where at the end we are just holding an empty bag because simply we've been exploited. So we need to leverage that for our own media development. So I don't know if I answer your question.
Yes. It was so clear, and that brings my attention to. If you see now in Africa, African film cinema have been categorized almost into 4 or 5. Maybe the North, the African speaking, Arabic speaking cinema, the West, where the French are dominating, and
Mhm.
maybe Central is just French and English, and down is South is more of Swahili, English, a lot more. Can you take us through these regions and how they are doing enough to make sure that they are telling African stories?
You know, those production, those I would say for those different regions really uh, exemplifies what's it called African cinemas in the plural, because here we have a very eclectic and very diversified production in a way that for me is that's the part where I'm happy that we get to see that diversity, but at the same time we have to find ways to capitalize on the interest that is being lavished on us, and but also is the challenge is if it's on the continent, I would say take advantage of it, but outside the continent is I simply sometimes have a feeling that we get categorized on the umbrella under the umbrella of world cinema, and that usually means that anything that is not Western or some Asian countries is could just dump into world cinema. So as long as we're not being, I'm talking about at the global level, dumped into that category of world cinema, which really means like anything goes into that bucket. If it's okay, apart from that, I'm very pleased to see what is happening on the continent. Because to be honest, it's filmmaking require a lot of funding and also a lot of infrastructure. And considering that sometimes, not to say most, very often on the continent, policymakers don't don't open opportunities for filmmakers, for let's say culture, enterprise, entrepreneurs. So it's very difficult. I'm going to give you maybe one statistic that's give maybe it's revealing, because if you take most African countries, how many devote 2%? I'm just taking a very low number. How many countries devote 2% of the budget to culture? I don't think you have more than 10.
They will not be. They will not be
So,
because they
mhm,
don't take even the whole process serious. Because a Nigerian filmmaker is finding it very difficult to take his filming crew and set to Gambia to film
mhm,
because lack of policy, and there are a lot of hiccups and challenges, process, permit, and he may invest himself, carry his people after getting the permit, and when he is on the ground there, then the government and the enforcement agency they say otherwise. And that is why lots more filmmakers are seeing the recently adopted agreement, the AFTA agreement, Africa Free Continental Agreement,
mhm,
that this agreement does not involve the interests of film and TV industry. Unlike agreement that like the NAFTA, not American,
mhm.
and there are a lot of co-relationship between European Union and NAFTA. It seems to be like when it comes to policy makers and policy making building agreements that works, we are far from meeting the reality, because at this point co-production between these countries is most of the time is not workable. Going out there to film in different part of Africa again is not working. But I don't know from your angle.
Yeah, because for me, it really speaks to the larger point of our understanding or failure. I would say our failure to take into account that culture is the bedrock of our development. It's the bedrock. It should be the bedrock of our development, because even we talk about economy. Economy for me is a way of the way of producing wealth and distributing wealth, and that's if you talk about producing and distributing wealth, our culture has notions about it. Or even you take politics. I'm just saying, if you take in every area of our lives, it's regulated by culture. But yet, we miserable fail to understand that culture is very important to our own identity, but also to the economic development. Because I know today everything is about economic development. So, if you go to a policymaker, that will tell you what will that what will be what will your cultural project brings to us in terms of GDP. It always think in terms of numbers. So why the culture in some cases you cannot put a number on it, or if you want you can even put a number in terms of job creation. But my point is it's very pervasive in terms of who we are, in terms of economy, in terms of all realm of a society. But yet uh, we still have to fight to make the point that culture need funding and culture need to be up there, like the defense, because I think the defense in most African countries has the higher proportion. Just to say that how important it is to us, like defense is.
Hmm. That's right. Prof, maybe from the angles of scholars, how much African cinema was now, maybe from the data available.
From the data available, I think the very recent one is the reports released by not by FESPACO, released by UNESCO in October 2021, which is I would say the most comprehensive African study for many decades now on African cinema. So UNESCO did it, and the statistics are simply the potential is 20 million people that the industry can employ, uh, and for $20 billion annually in revenue that it can bring in. So that tells you that in terms of the potential, African film and African cinema has a great potential. Okay, you mentioned in terms of scholarship. In terms of scholarship, more and more, been a rise in production and scholarship on African cinema, be it books or articles. But what the part where I'm not satisfied, or I see that we have a lot. We haven't even scratched the surface yet. Is on the continent, which is how can we talk about African cinema while on the continent we can maybe count on the fingers of one hand African film and media departments at universities. We don't have many.
Sure.
So how can we, okay, so we only talk about African cinema in terms of production, one in terms of films, the production, but in terms of the knowledge production around cinema, we don't have, that's knowledge production. Or we talk about when we talk about education is mostly on the technical part, cinematography, lighting, set design, but to have a critical reflection on African cinema, be it within the confines of the continent or in relation to the other cinematic practices around the world, the critical reflection we often don't have many I would say spaces to do it on the continent in a very formal way, like universities that have departments that are specifically on African cinema. That's
Yeah, because most of the time when we are talking about film studies or skills, upscaling yourself as a filmmaker, director, production manager, or anything that has to do with expatriate, everybody is just heading to New York Film Academy. We
Mhm.
don't have film academies in Africa doing so much. Or do we have?
What we have on the continent, the equivalent of New York Film Academy is now what we call the film labs that we have on the continent. I know there is one in Burkina Faso, in my home country, it's known as Waga Film Lab, and I know one is also in Gabon. I know one in Central or Cameroon. One is Cameroon. So we have, for over the last 7 years now, the film labs propping, springing up over the continent, and film labs are designed as one-stop shops where we bring in filmmakers, producers around workshops. Uh, so that is the equivalent that we see on the continent. So apart from that, it's more skills, development on the skills development. Along that question, one dimension that I see on the continent that needs really more improvement is studio filmmaking practice. Studio filmmaking practice. You have few countries. I would say South Africa definitely the one that is has a big studio filmmaking practice. The second one is Morocco, to the point that you have Hollywood studio that comes there and shoot like Star Wars and others, or but for us so far, we have, when I say us, I'm talking on the continent, the studio filmmaking hasn't entered the practice in a very significant way. While, the studio filmmaking, uh, for me, in terms of creativity, will expand the creativity and also have an added value on the production. Because so far, all our production are just, exterior, shooting. But studio production, it's something that once we develop it, that practice for me, it will take African cinema, even higher.
And you talk of in-house in-studio filmmaking, and this brings my attention to film villages. Across Africa, film villages are finding it very difficult to be sustained. Like in Nigeria, in Cameroon, you mentioned Cameroon. I know some film villages in Morocco and Egypt. I'm not sure of Senegal because I've never been any seen any film village in Senegal. But how are you seeing all these film villages and their impact in Africa, aside from in-house studios?
Yeah, I think with the film villages, you have to find a way. If it's built around productions, usually it's built around production and sightseeing. So production, it means that okay, you need to have productions continually to make it to break even or make profit. That's one challenge. And the second is if it's bringing visitors to see where certain shows or films have been, shot, and it means that the film or the shows first need to have a following, which means that they need to be very popular for people to be willing to pay to visit, and that hasn't been always the case. For Morocco, where he has been, I don't know, I would say a little bit successful in the Ouarzazate Desert, on the edge of the Ouarzazate Desert in southern Morocco. Uh, it's because where you have uh, Hollywood big studios that went in and shoot some of the, I don't know, the most memorable, movies that most of us came of age with. So if you talk about Star Wars, some of it is shot there. The movie that Russell Crowe played in, you know, a blink on the title of the movie. So so you see many, those type of productions that has a huge following inside the continent and outside, that can draw many people to come continually to visit and then to generate revenue. But if it's only based on production, that is really challenging unless it's countries like South Africa where you have a production continually. I was discussing with a filmmaker from DRC who was telling me how production is going in South Africa to a point that if you need a crew, you have to try to you have to schedule it months in advance, because you have crew members who are already booked for many projects months ahead. While in other countries, I'll say Burkina Faso, or in other countries, maybe you have two feature film or three feature film a year maximum.
And maybe, sir, before we wrap up, I would like to ask you what kind of leadership you think Nollywood, as one of the leading industry in Africa and globally when it comes to Bollywood, what kind of leadership this industry should provide to African filmmakers?
Yeah, for African filmmakers, I think for me the lesson for Nollywood is we used to think that cinema, you have to go, you have to be anointed by the West. You have to be anointed by the West, to be a filmmaker. So you have to be, your film has to be selected by Cannes Film Festival or Berlin or Venice to be a filmmaker. But Nollywood proved that you can be a filmmaker, recognized locally, and then and then from there globally be recognized. And also Nollywood provide the template that our stories has a lot of potential. And also Nollywood provide the example that in Africa, we have the audience for our own movies. So now it's up to us to find a way to generate revenue to create local sustainable film industries. So in that sense, it's like Nollywood, give you that sense of pride that your story, the African story or African stories, is not something that you should be less proud of. You should be proud of yourself, and our story sells well within the continent, but also outside of the continent. That's why we see the big studios coming in, because they know that we have the stories to tell. And also, one last point on Nollywood is this commercial side of filmmaking. Let's say the business side of cinema, and you have many film practices on the continent where the business side is not developed. The focus more is on the art side, but we know film is business and art side. But Nollywood shows that the business side, should be something that should be developed, groomed, and it will contribute to the GDP, and also will open up employment opportunities for youth.
And many filmmakers, especially the executives, are complaining, even though globally a lot of cinema goers, the number of cinema goers is getting down. But yet in Africa, the thing is getting out of hand. In fact, Africans, it seems they are no more going to cinema. Why? Or are we not, African filmmakers not providing the rightful content that will bring Africans or take Africans to enter cinemas and complement the film distribution value chain?
uh, for the I'm kind of ambivalent on this because on one hand, like I would say on the continent, it's a continuation of a general trend of what is when I say general trend. I'm talking about Hollywood studio cinema, which is for me is in an identity crisis right now. Right now we have the writers and the writers and the actors are on strike in Hollywood, and the backdrop of it is simply the Netflix streaming economic model, to the point that to go to the cinema now, what's like me going, I like to go to the AMC theaters in New York here, but when people go there, usually it's a Marvel movie, or it's one of a sequel of the big franchises like Mission Impossible that is coming out, or Mission Impossible with Tom Cruise that is currently or will be in the theaters. Those, so we have almost all the same thing. I'm talking about you will have a ripple effect on the continent of Hollywood studio cinema that doesn't could bring many people to the theaters unless it is Marvel or superheroes movies. That's one. Second, you have the streaming that's kind of represent a negation of what cinema is. Streaming is by its nature an individual experience, while cinema, as we know, is a communal experience. And we see streaming that is overtaking the theatrical experience that we grew up with. But where I would say the silver lining for me is seeing, comparing the US here, and I'll take the case of Burkina Faso back home. Back home in Burkina Faso, when a local movie is released in the theaters are packed. The theaters are packed for weeks. But here, if a Marvel movie comes out, or a superhero movie comes out, within 2 weeks, it's gone. The momentum is gone. So I'm saying that on the continent, I still see more people going to the movie theaters, seeing African movie. I'm talking about African movies. Than I see, in the US here, people going to movie theaters except for Marvel and superhero movies.
Yes, yeah. You talk of the strike going round in the US right now. The actors, the writers, and the directors supporting all of these guys. I mean, what African people, African filmmakers, African cinema should learn from all the strike?
I think what we should learn
And
is,
maybe why African unions, film guilds are not powerful enough.
I think that what we should learn is cinema, as we have known it, is evolving and changing. Is evolving and changing. I mentioned earlier that cinema is a communal experience, but it's moving into a direction where it's more like individual experience. That's on the experience side. On the creative side and the business side, we see more. It used to be this, I don't say used to be, but it's built around studios. But more and more, it's the model is a streaming, and streaming, the economics of it is completely different. So to the point that the cinema is, I would say cinema is searching for the answers for the technological, I would say the digital technology that has ushered in this change, which led to a different economic model. So I'm talking about, on the continent, should also start this conversation of what are the changes being brought to cinema in the digital area of streaming, and what the consequences are or will be on the economic model. That's what we should be learning from the actors and the writers strike in Hollywood. Because one of the points that if you take the writers, I was reading an article of the New York Times 2 days ago, and the article talks about how the writers complain that they used to be hired to work on television, series or in a movie, and sometimes they will be allowed to go on set and have the input in the production. And now, no, it's not the case. Now the work has been the work that's normally 6 months. Now it's only maybe 14 weeks, and they don't have opportunity to give an input when invited on the set, or sometimes they don't even get invited on the set. And why is simply the producers who want to make more profit, or they require uh, to make more profit. So those are the changes that we should anticipate on the continent in terms of how actors and writers are facing challenges. And some of the writers in that article mentioned AI, artificial intelligence, and fearing that their work might be in the near future may not be original writing, but just simply editing what the AI has produced. I think those are the things that we should anticipate on the continent and start having a conversation around it.
Mm. And that brings me to the battle now between the game of job creation and AI in the film industry. How do you think Africa should look into that as a continent?
Mhm. In terms of job creation or AI?
In terms of AI, managing the struggle of people are now seeing globally like AI is coming to take away our jobs
Hmm.
in the industry. And in the US now, writers have already voiced out,
Hmm.
and a lot of editors are already complaining how AI is taking them away from the value chain of filmmaking.
Yeah.
And the conversation is maybe coming to Africa. How do you think African filmmakers and storytellers, especially the tech guys, editors, post production to be specific, and pre-production, how this issue
Yeah.
of
For me,
AI
yeah.
and jobs?
Yes, for me it's something that we cannot avoid. Sorry to say it, to put it this way, but this tech the technological development, we have to simply to find a way to less make it less less harmful to jobs and people's life. But apart from that, I think that this one is we have reached the point of simply this technology development. We have to confront it. AI is here. Now the question is, how do we live with it? Because the way I see it is, the technological development that the world has, experienced, from the industrial revolution to, the 90s, with the dot-com, to the digital technology, and talk about image production distribution, and now AI. It could be just a short phenomenon, or it could be something that is very impactful for I would say for years to come. The way in short, I will compare it to what the COVID pandemic had ushered in the workplace, which is remote work.
That is nice.
Yeah, remote work, initially we're very resistant to it, and sometimes, but now it's here to stay. We just have to find a way to, accept it, be it on the side of employers or employee. For me, the way I see AI is also here to stay. Now, how quickly can we embrace it and find ways to alleviate its potential, potential harmful effects on our jobs? I think that's the next step to go, because even
in short, Prof, maybe you are trying to say something.
No, I'm just saying, look, even in my, what I do in terms of, writing books, and you can see, AI can write books. I'm just saying that, okay, I'm just saying it's impacting every aspect of human activity, or has the potential to impact. Now it's been okay. Now, it's very difficult to reverse that technology and kind of say and create AI. No, it's too late for that. Now it's how do we really adapt?
So, Professor, before we wrap up the show, what are your call and message to the African filmmakers, creative policy makers, and at large, your prediction about what the future have for the African cinema in 5 to 10 years?
To the policymakers, I will say that please rise up to the potential of your filmmakers, of your storytellers, because this African storytellers have nothing to envy the rest of the world in terms of talent. In terms of talent, they have proven it, every time that the films are in competition at the most prestigious festivals, winning prizes, that the talent is up there. Now the policymakers have to live up to that, that level. That our continent has resources, has wealth in terms of culture. That need to happen. And to the filmmakers, I would say to be very nimble and flexible in terms of the changes that is happening. We were talking earlier about AI, or the Netflix streaming economic model is here. So we have to find ways to make it work for ourselves. And most importantly, we have transnational media companies that are, taking keen interest and sometimes presence on the continent. And it's up to us to find ways to capitalize on that interest while that interest is still there. Because once they get what they want, they will just leave. And that will be, left, holding an empty bag. And we don't want to be in that position. And in terms of education and scholarship, I will really, really make this appeal to educational leaders, policy makers on the continent, to open spaces where young people, young filmmakers can learn about the past generation of African filmmakers, the past heritage of African cinema, because we have a very rich heritage of African cinema that should be taught to the younger generation. And that can happen if we have African cinema programs at universities, or African film and media department at universities or at higher learning centers. And that needs to happen, because African cinema, we shouldn't talk about it only referring to film production, or only for books or articles that are written by scholars based outside the continent. We have to assume the leadership when it comes to African cinema first on the continent.
And where are you seeing the world African industry at large? Where are you seeing film industry or African cinema in the next coming 5 to 10 years?
5 to 10 years, I'll say that we will be going through changes, cinema in general, from the digital technology side of it. So, we talk about virtual reality, augmented reality. You combine that to the progress of animation, animated images. So we are in for more changes to come. For African cinema, I see we are really on the cusp or at the crossroad where we can harness the potential of digital technology to expand our storytelling ranges. So in that sense, yes, because the technology has democratized the access and the distribution of content, so that we don't need to go through gatekeepers. We can do a pretty good job by harnessing that potential from digital technology. In that sense, I will see more productions, but also more acuter. The question will be, what is the economic model for African cinemas? So how do we make money?
Yeah.
How do you make money for our productions? That will be facing that question even greater.
And your message to Nollywood, to be specific, Nollywood.
To Nollywood, I said you have opened a window. You have given us a template for commercial and popular cinema, and you have made us very proud that African Stories has an audience, and African Story can be as good as any movie that we've seen coming from the big studios. So please keep up the good work, and I know that you are capable of even leading us further.
And from your angle as a scholar and a filmmaker, what we should be expecting from you, be it books, be it your festival, be it your career, and in both scholarship and filmmaking, what should we expecting from you?
From me is still continuing with my animation, Harlem African Animation Film Festival, and also continuing with this textbook. This is the second edition, which came out January. So I will be continuing with further editions to add the most updated information, and digging deeper into areas that hasn't got a lot of attention. And I would give one. which is gaming. Gaming has a very good economic potential on the continent, but also on terms of production. So gaming is something to look out for, and me, I'm going to dig deeper into gaming when it comes to the continent. And also, I'm also more and more interested in exhibition when it comes to African cinema. Could be a museum exhibit, could be video installation around African cinema. So those are the things to watch out for, and obviously going back to filmmaking. Yes.
That was amazing. But as a writer, a researcher, do you believe are you identifying with the impact of your works and your books, and locally Africans, be it researchers, be it filmmakers, reading your books?
I would say because you have the economics of the books that makes books published in the global north, I would say very expensive on the continent. So, but for this textbook, I've been able to negotiate with the publisher so that copies sold on the continent are almost half price. So, in that sense, yes, the textbook has been, very popular on the continent, but also outside the continent. Because when this textbook came out, it was the number one. It was number one on Amazon new releases. So meaning that you have that interest in African cinema globally. So so I can say that the impact, yes, but I aim more maybe to have the opportunity to have a publisher on the continent, so that the books published on the continents are even cheaper than the books published here.
So thank you, Professor. We appreciate joining us in this conversation and being part of the Nollywood Dealmakers.
Thank you so much for having me, and my pleasure to have been on this show. And I look forward to more conversation. And I'm sure the conversation will be continuing, beyond this show, in the larger community.
So thank you, Professor, and we appreciate, and we believe next time and you'll be able to join us.
Definitely. Thank you, and bye-bye.
We have a fruitful conversation. Okay. So here we come to the end of today's conversation on the Nollywood Dealmakers. On behalf of our crew and everyone joining us, I remain your host, Musa Sunusi Ahmed, signing out.